Today in the Quadratec Academy, we're going to show you how to change the oil in the 2018 or newer Jeep Wrangler JL. Hey, Rob here for Quadratec.com. Today in the Quadratec Academy, we're talking about one of the easiest, yet probably one of the most important pieces of routine maintenance that you can do to your Jeep Wrangler JL to not only keep it running in tip-top shape, but to prolong the life of your engine. That is, of course, a routine oil change. Now, sure, you could take your Jeep back to the dealership or maybe to your local mechanic to do the job. But with this new 3.6-liter Pentastar V6 under the hood of the 2018 and up Jeep Wrangler JL, the job of changing your oil is so easy, there's really not an excuse not to tackle the job at home in your own garage or driveway. It gives you a chance at getting familiar at working on your own Jeep, which could come in handy later on if you're out on the trails and you have an issue, but it also gives you the satisfaction of knowing that you're working on and maintaining your own vehicle. And Jeep has even taken all the guesswork about when is the right time to do an oil change out of the process. Your Jeep is going to tell you right in the gauge cluster the exact right time to do an oil change, and you probably have all the tools you need to do the job at home in your garage already, and we can go over all those right now. Now, of course, one of the biggest things you're going to need to do an oil change, well, that is some new oil to put in the motor after you take the old stuff out. Now, a lot of you guys out there may already be aware that Jeep has been using that 3.6-liter V6 for a number of years now. But with the introduction of the all-new Jeep Wrangler JL, well, some of the oil change specifications and requirements for this specific 3.6-liter have changed over some of the older model Wranglers. So the best place to always find the correct specifications for your specific Jeep are, of course, in the owner's manual. Now, our owner's manual for our 2018 Jeep Wrangler JL here is going to tell us that we need an oil that's 0W20, and we're going to need 5 quarts of that oil. Now, one of the other important specifications that it does mention there is that we need an oil that meets or exceeds Chrysler MS-6395 specifications here. And while it doesn't mention anything about it being a full synthetic oil, you'll notice that is what we have on the counter here today. And I will say that most, if not all, of the oils that you're going to find down at your local auto parts store that are a 0W20, they are going to be a full synthetic oil, and that is perfectly acceptable to use in the 3.6-liter under the hood of our Jeep Wrangler JL. Again, I mentioned you're going to need 5 quarts of that oil. Well, most oil companies already package that neatly in a 5-quart jug for you, and the owner's manual suggests using either a Mopar, a Pennzoil, or a Shell oil, so our Pennzoil here is going to do just fine. You're also going to need a replacement oil filter. We're going to be using the Mopar M0-349 OE oil filter. One of the other great things about doing your own oil change means that you have some choice at not only what oil you're putting in your motor, but what filter you're using. So you can choose to use the Mopar filter, or you can shop our complete line of aftermarket filters available by clicking on that info button to head over to Quadratec.com. Then, of course, you are going to need something to catch the used oil in. An oil pan is going to do a great job of that. A funnel is going to make the job of pouring that new oil back in the motor a little bit easier. Some rags are always good to have on hand when you're doing an oil change. And you're just going to need a few hand tools to do this job. So we're going to need a ratchet. You're also going to need a 13mm socket, and that's going to be used to loosen and remove the oil drain bolt from the oil pan. You're going to need a 24mm socket. That's going to be used to remove the oil filter housing cap. Now, I have an adapter here that's simply going to allow me to use my 24mm socket. Happens to be 1/2-inch drive with my 3/8 drive ratchet. An extension is going to come in handy for reaching that oil filter cap. And then you are going to need either a pick or a small flathead screwdriver, and that's simply going to be used to replace an O-ring on that oil filter housing cap. Now, the first thing we can go ahead and do is grab our ratchet and our 13mm socket, and we can slide underneath of our Jeep. Speaking of that, one of the great things that makes doing an oil change on a Wrangler a little bit easier than some other vehicles out there is because of the increased ground clearance underneath your Wrangler. Well, it means you're not going to need any specialized ramps or a vehicle lift to get under there to get access to the drain bolt. We can simply slide underneath of our Jeep, put our oil drain pan in place, and loosen and remove that drain bolt with our 13mm socket. And now that we've got our oil draining, we can go ahead and move back up under the hood. Now we're going to go ahead and leave the oil drain bolt out for the next few minutes while we're working under the hood here, and that's going to give the oil time to completely drain out of the drain pan. Now you guys at home can use the prop rod to hold up the hood while you're working underneath here. I'm going to go ahead and lay the hood back against the windshield just to give me a little bit more room to show you guys at home what we're working on here. So as you can see, on the 3.6 liter V6, we've got our oil fill cap right here on the driver's side of the engine here. And just like in that owner's manual, we can see the cap specifies 0W20 oil is preferred for this motor. Now just to the left of that, right in the middle, you can see this is where our oil filter is housed, right on top of the motor here. This is where we need that 24 millimeter socket. Our socket wrench and the extension, as you can see, comes in handy here. And we can go ahead and remove that cap. And once you get it loose, it's a good idea to go ahead and grab a rag or a shop towel, because that oil filter is going to remain with the cap when you remove it. You just want to keep any oil from dripping down in the motor there. So now we can go ahead and unpack our new oil filter. Set that on the table, and you want to make sure you don't forget, you should have an O-ring in the bottom of the box there. You definitely don't want to forget that. We can go ahead and pull that filter out of the cap. Should just snap right out of the cap there. And this is where we need to go ahead and grab our pick tool or a small flathead screwdriver, and we're going to use that to simply remove this old O-ring from the oil filter cap. We can set that aside. Now it's a good idea to grab, you can get a little bit of the old oil from the old filter and just lubricate that new O-ring. Install that back onto our filter cap. Grab the new filter and that'll snap right back into the cap. Now it's a good idea to, again, grab a little bit of that old used oil off the old filter and put a little bit on this O-ring down at the bottom of the new filter. And we can go ahead and drop this back in the motor. Now you don't need to over tighten that oil filter cap. Simply want to snug it down, give it a little bit extra on the wrench. Now by this time, the rest of the remaining used oil should have finished draining out of our oil pan. We can go ahead back underneath the Jeep, grab that 13 millimeter socket and reinstall our drain bolt. Just like with that oil filter cap, you don't need to go overboard tightening the drain bolt. Simply snug it up and then give it a little bit extra on the wrench. That will give you a nice good seal that you won't have a problem getting that drain bolt out at your next oil change. Now that we can move back up here underneath the hood, we can go ahead and remove our oil filler cap. Now the filler neck on here is a pretty wide opening, but I still like to go ahead and grab a funnel. It's just going to make the job of pouring the oil in a little bit easier. You're not going to run the risk of spilling any oil on the top of your engine. It's not only going to make your engine dirty, but it could be a fire hazard too. So you definitely want to be safe here. We go ahead, crack the cap on our new bottle of oil, and we can go ahead and start filling her back up. Now the last thing we need to do to complete the oil change on our 2018 or newer Jeep Wrangler JL is to go ahead and jump inside the Jeep so we can reset that oil change reminder light on the dashboard. But first, we can go ahead and close the hood. Like I mentioned a little earlier, one of the really cool things about the Jeep Wrangler JL is the oil life reminder system that's built right into your gauge cluster. It's actually a duty cycle based system. What I mean by that is it's not simply a timer that you're resetting that's going to trip in a set number of miles or a set time from your last oil change, but it's actually monitoring the style of driving that you're doing with your Wrangler. So if you're somebody who's simply driving around town, doing some highway miles, those are pretty easy miles on the engine, and that's actually going to give you a longer oil life. Now, if you're somebody who's going through a lot of stop and go traffic, or maybe you're doing a lot of off-road miles, well, that's going to significantly decrease the life of your oil. Now, the owner's manual indicates a frequency anywhere between 3,500 miles and 10,000 miles being the maximum that you could get a reminder on the dash that it's time to change your oil. Of course, 10,000 miles is the maximum amount of time you should ever let go between oil changes. That or about 12 months of time, whichever comes first. I'm sure most of us are going to see that oil change reminder system pop up long before then. And of course, when you do that, every time you start up your Jeep when it's time for an oil change, well, you're going to get a little message that appears right here on your info center in the middle of your gauges, letting you know it's time for an oil change. So now that we've completed our oil change, we need to reset that indicator. And there's two ways to do that as indicated in our owner's manual. The first just requires us to go ahead and hit our start-stop button twice to actually put our Jeep's ignition in the run position. And we do that without our foot on the brake. So it's not actually starting the engine, it's just turning the ignition on to run. Now from here, we have 10 seconds. We're gonna slowly push and release the gas pedal 3 times. After we complete that, we go ahead, hit the start-stop button again, turning the ignition off, and that resets our oil change reminder system. Now the second way, and the way that I find to be a little bit easier and a little bit clearer to understand, again, is going to require us to hit that start-stop button twice, putting our ignition into run mode. You can go ahead and let our gauges cycle through here. And now we can use the arrow keys on the left side of our steering wheel, and we want to cycle through until we see vehicle info on the center of our gauge cluster. Now we can use our left and right arrows, and we want to move over until we see our oil life indicator. And you'll see a little message there, hold OK to reset. We'll hold OK in the center of the steering wheel. And there we go, we're back up to 100% and we're ready to monitor until the next time we need an oil change. Now, every time you do an oil change on your Jeep, it's also a good time to check out some other routine maintenance items, things like rotating your tires, checking to make sure that your battery cables are not only clean, but also tight. It's also a great time to check, inspect, and replace, if need be, your underhood engine air filter or your interior cabin air filters. If you want to get more information or watch any of our other Quadratec Academy videos on how to complete some of those maintenance items, well, you can click that info button to check those out. Of course, you want to make sure you hit that subscribe button so you're sure to catch all of our latest videos right here in the Quadratec Academy. Until next time, I'm Rob. I'll see you guys out on the trail. Still going.